The perfect weapon. The sky was dark over planet Cylon 9. Black clouds floated above ruined cities. The ground was cold and covered in metal dust. Nothing green had grown there for years. Caliph walked alone through the ruins. She was not human. Her skin was pale blue, her eyes sharp and silver. Armor covered her body, light but strong. She moved like a shadow, quiet and fast. She was the best warrior in her army. Her mission was simple: hunt and kill the last human hiding on Cylon 9. Humans had destroyed her home world during the Great War. Now she was trained to destroy every human left. She had never failed a mission. A voice came into her ear from the command center. "Target is in Sector 9. Move fast. No mistakes, Caliph." "Understood," she said coldly. She jumped over broken buildings, climbed walls with ease, and followed heat signals through her scanner. Her face showed no emotion. She had no friends, no family left. Only duty. But something was different about this mission. The human was not fighting back. He wasn't hiding in bunkers or setting traps. He was just walking, moving slowly, alone, through the ruins. Caliph watched from a distance. He looked weak, dirty. His clothes were torn. He didn't carry a weapon. He helped an injured bird and gave it food. He sat near a broken fountain and looked at the sky. Caliph raised her plasma rifle. Just one shot. She could end it now. But then, he looked up. His eyes met hers. Caliph froze. It was the first time a human had looked at her like that. Not with fear, not with hate. His eyes were soft, tired, kind. She lowered her weapon without knowing why. Her heart beat faster. This was wrong. She was trained to kill. No emotions, no mercy. But still, she didn't shoot. The human stood up slowly. He didn't run. He didn't speak. He just gave a small nod and turned around, walking into the ruins. Caliph stood still for a long moment. What just happened? She shook her head and spoke into her calm. "Target neutralized." It was a lie, but she said it with a calm voice. Her command center believed her. She turned off her tracker and followed him quietly. Something about him was strange. Something inside her was changing. That night, she sat on a high wall and watched him from above. He made a small fire. He ate an old food pack slowly. He looked at a photo in his hand. Maybe his family. She couldn't tell. Caliph touched the side of her armor. Inside was a small stone her mother gave her before dying in the war. She hadn't thought about her mother in years. Suddenly, her scanner beeped. A drone flew above, scanning the area. Caliph's heart dropped. The drone had seen her. It would send images back to base. They would know she lied. And worse, they would come for her. She looked back down. The human had no idea. He was just staring at the fire. Caliph had a choice now. Kill him and fix her mistake, or protect him and face death herself. For the first time in her life, Caliph didn't know what to do, and that scared her more than any weapon ever could. The human she couldn't kill. Caliph didn't sleep that night. She sat in silence on the edge of a broken wall, high above the ruins. Her eyes stayed on the firelight below, where the human rested. His name was still a mystery. Everything about him was a mystery. But one thing was clear. He had looked into her eyes, and she hadn't pulled the trigger. That had never happened before. Every part of her training told her she had failed. But her heart, quiet for so long, whispered something new. He is not what they said. He is not the monster. Caliph closed her eyes, trying to silence the thought. But the image of his face wouldn't leave her mind. Tired, yes, but also peaceful, gentle, almost human. The wind blew cold. Her armor kept her warm, but not from the feeling inside. Confusion, guilt, fear, and then a sharp beep. Her wrist screen flashed red. Incoming message. Mission review in 12 hours. Status. Target confirmed eliminated. Reply required. Her fingers hovered over the screen. She could confirm the lie. They would believe her. No one would come. Or she could tell the truth, that she had led a human life. But what would they do then? Execute her? Erase her memory? Worse? Caliph turned off the message. For now, she needed answers. Answers only the human could give. The next morning, the human moved again. She followed him through the ruins, always at a distance. He didn't know she was there. Or maybe he did. Maybe he just didn't care. He stopped near a collapsed building. There, under the rubble, was a small animal. An alien creature with soft fur and broken legs. It whimpered in pain. Caliph watched from the shadows. The human knelt, gentle hands lifting the creature. He tore a piece of his own shirt to wrap its leg. Then he fed it a few dry crumbs from his pocket. He smiled. He smiled. In this ruined world, alone and hunted, he still found a reason to care. Caliph stepped back, heart pounding. She remembered something long ago. Her mother's hands, helping a sick bird when she was just a child. Life is life, her mother had said. Even the weak deserve kindness. But those words were forbidden now. The war had erased them. Her people had erased them. And yet, here was a human living by them. By evening, Caliph made a decision. She would speak to him, not as a soldier, but as someone who didn't understand what was happening anymore. She waited until he stopped again. He built a small fire inside a cracked stone room, heart of a once huge school. The roof was open to the sky. Caliph stepped forward, out of the shadows. The human looked up, not surprised, not afraid. They stared at each other in silence. Finally, she spoke. Her voice was low, unsure. Why didn't you run? He blinked, thinking. You didn't look like a killer, he said. You looked sad. His words hit her like a wave. No one had ever said that before. Not in all her years of war. You knew I was hunting you, she said. Yes, but you didn't fight. I was tired, he said softly. I've been running too long. She walked closer, one step at a time. Her weapon was on her back, untouched. What's your name? She asked. Eli, he said. And you? She hesitated. Caliph. They sat by the fire. The injured animal from before slept in Eli's jacket, warm and safe. They didn't talk much. The silence between them said more than words. For the first time, Caliph saw the stars above not as a battlefield, but as something beautiful. But peace didn't last long. In the middle of the night, Caliph's scanner beeped again. This time, it was not a message. It was a warning. A drone had recorded her face, her location. Her tracker, even offline, had pinged a silent alarm. They were coming. Her own people were coming. Not to help her, but to kill her. Eli looked at her as she stood up quickly. What's wrong? He asked. They know, she said. They know I let you live. Eli stood too. Then we run. No, she said. You run. They want me now. No, he said firmly. We run together. Caliph looked at him in shock. This was the human she was trained to destroy. But now, he was the only one willing to protect her. For the first time in her life, Caliph felt fear. Not of dying, but of losing something she had just started to care about. Hunted by her own people. The sun had not risen yet. The cold wind cut through the ruins of Xylon 9 like sharp glass. Dust danced in the air, glowing faintly under the broken moonlight. Caliph moved fast through the empty streets, her steps light and silent. Beside her, Eli ran to keep up. He was breathing hard but stayed close. They didn't speak. There was no time. Behind them, far in the sky, 3 glowing red lights appeared. Reaper drones. Elite machines used by Caliph's people to track and kill traitors. They didn't miss. Caliph glanced at Eli. His face was pale. He looked tired. Human bodies weren't built for this much running. He won't last like this, she thought. We need cover, she said. They ran into a collapsed metro tunnel, the entrance half buried under metal beams. Inside, it was dark, damp, and silent. They stopped to catch their breath. "You said, they're your people?" Ely asked between gasps. Caliph nodded. "They were. Now they want me dead. Because of me." She looked at him. "No," she said, "because of me." She sat down on a broken bench. Her armor buzzed softly, scanning for danger. "I lied to them," she said. "I said you were dead. Now they know I spared you. That makes me a traitor." Ely was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I'm sorry." Caliph raised an eyebrow. "Why?" "Because you saved me," he said. "And now you're paying the price." She looked away. Her voice turned low. "You're not what they told us. I was trained to believe humans were monsters, heartless, cruel." He smiled weakly. "Some of us are. Not all." They shared a short silence. In that moment, a small piece of trust began to grow between them. Outside, the red lights came closer. The drones had found their trail. Deep in the alien capital, Caliph's old commander stood before a group of soldiers. "Caliph has turned," he said coldly. "She walks with the human now. She is no longer one of us." He held up a live feed from the drones. Caliph and Ely, sitting together in the tunnel. "Bring them in, dead or alive." Back in the tunnel, Caliph and Ely began to move again. "This way," she said. "There's an old science facility outside the city. It has underground levels, deep ones. They won't find us there." Ely followed her, trusting her more with every step. They walked for hours, moving through broken train cars and rusty tracks. The world above was waking. Sounds of distant explosions echoed through the ruins. Suddenly, Caliph stopped. "Get down," she whispered. A soft whirring noise filled the air. Then, whoosh! A red beam of plasma hit the ground near Ely's foot. They dived behind a thick wall of steel. Caliph pulled out her weapon. Her eyes turned sharp, focused. "How many?" Ely asked. "3 drones, maybe more behind them." "What do we do?" "We fight," she said. Ely's heart raced. He had no weapons, no armor. He was just a man with nothing left to lose. But Caliph was different now. Not just a soldier, not just a weapon. She was protecting something. Maybe for the first time in her life. The battle was fast and deadly. Caliph moved like lightning, shooting down one drone with a perfect strike. The second drone fired a missile. She tackled Ely just in time as the blast shook the tunnel. Dust filled the air. The third drone hovered above them, locking its aim. Ely picked up a broken metal pipe. "Stay down," Caliph shouted. But Ely ran forward. He swung the pipe hard, smashing the drone's camera just before it fired. The beam missed and burned into a wall instead. Caliph jumped and fired again. Boom! The last drone exploded. Silence. Ely coughed, covered in dust. "That was stupid," he said. Caliph helped him up. "Yes, but brave." She stared at him. Not like a soldier, not like an enemy, but like someone seeing something rare. Hope. They reached the old science facility by night. The doors were half buried, but Caliph found a back entrance. Inside, it was dark and cold, but safe. "We'll rest here," she said. Ely leaned against a wall, exhausted. His hands were shaking. "You okay?" Caliph asked. "I will be," he said. "As long as you are." Caliph didn't answer. She just looked at him. And for the first time, she smiled. A real smile. One she had forgotten how to make. But outside, in the skies of Xylon 9, a new order was already given. Caliph must be captured alive. And the human must be destroyed. A warrior's first tear. Inside the old science facility, everything was broken. Walls were cracked, floors covered in dust. Wires hung from the ceilings like dead vines. Machines long forgotten blinked faint blue lights in the dark. The war had left this place empty, like a ghost city buried under metal. Eli sat near an old control panel. His face was pale, his body sore. Small cuts covered his arms, and his clothes were almost falling apart. But he was alive. And more than that, he was safe. Caliph sat across from him, her silver eyes scanning the room slowly. She checked her scanner twice. No movement. No drones nearby. For now, they had time to breathe. "How long do we stay here?" Eli asked softly. "Not long," Caliph said. "Once they find the dead drones, they'll track us again. Then why stop?" "You need rest," she said. Eli looked at her. "What about you?" Caliph didn't answer. She hadn't slept in 2 nights, but something else kept her awake, something stronger than exhaustion. Memories. Hours passed in silence. Caliph walked into a small side room and found a shattered glass wall. Behind it was an old lab. Metal chairs, microscopes, children's drawings still hung on one wall, faded and torn. She stepped inside, and suddenly, something broke inside her. She remembered being a child, a time before the war. She remembered her mother, tall, calm, gentle, her soft voice reading bedtime stories, her hands fixing broken toys, her laugh when Caliph painted stars on the ceiling. That world was gone, burned in the fire of war, replaced by commands, weapons, and silence. Caliph touched the dusty wall. A drawing was still clear. 2 figures, one blue-skinned, one human, holding hands under a yellow sun. She stared at it. Was this possible once? Could her people and humans live in peace? She didn't hear Eli come in. He stopped at the door, watching her. "What is this place?" he asked. Caliph spoke without turning. This was a learning center. They taught children from both sides here. Before the war broke everything. Eli walked beside her. He saw the same drawing. "You drew this?" he asked. Caliph nodded slowly. "I was 5. Eli looked at her, surprised. "You were here, before the war?" "Yes, I used to believe in peace, in kindness, in stories where enemies became friends." She turned and looked at him. "But they trained that out of me. They erased my childhood. They turned me into a weapon." Her voice cracked, just slightly, and a single tear rolled down her cheek. The first one in years. Eli said nothing. He didn't try to fix her pain. He just stepped closer and sat beside her. They sat there for a long time. 2 enemies, side by side. Not talking. Just breathing. Just remembering. Later that night, Eli fell asleep beside a small fire made from old papers and broken furniture. He used Caliph's spare armor cloth as a blanket. She gave it to him without a word. Caliph stood guard, but her mind was not on the scanner anymore. She looked at him. This human. He had no army, no weapons, no armor. But somehow, he had made her question everything. Not with force, but with kindness. He shared his food, even when he had little. He helped the injured, even when he was weak. He protected her, even when she was the one built to protect others. Caliph looked at her hands. Once, they were only used to kill. Now, for the first time, they had been used to save. She whispered something, almost too soft to hear. "Who am I now?" Far above the facility, 3 alien ships flew silently across the clouds. Inside, Commander Volan studied the map. "She is hiding in Sector 14, he said. "We wait until morning. Then we strike." A soldier asked, "Why not attack now?" Volan's eyes burned with hate. "Because I want her to feel safe first. I want her to believe the human changed her. Then, we destroy them both." He smiled. "Make it hurt." Just before dawn, Caliph's scanner beeped once. She opened it slowly. A message had arrived. But not from the military. From someone she hadn't heard from in years. Her sister. The message was short. "Caliph, they found me. Please help. They are coming for me too. Caleth's hands trembled. Eli woke up and saw her face. What is it? He asked. She showed him the message. My sister, she said. She's alive. But they're using her to get to me. Eli sat up straight. It's a trap, he said. Caleth nodded. I know, but I have to go. Then we go together. She looked at him. A mix of fear, hope, and something deeper. Why would you help me? She asked. He smiled. Because, you cried. Caleth didn't answer. She just looked at him. And for the second time, she smiled back. The choice between blood and love. The wind howled outside the broken walls of the old science facility. Morning light touched the sky, but it was weak and gray. The world of Xylon 9 stayed cold and silent, like it had forgotten what warmth felt like. Caleth stood near the open doorway, her silver eyes staring into the distance. She hadn't moved in a while. The message from her sister kept replaying in her mind. Caleth, they found me. Please help. They are coming for me too. Her hands shook slightly. Not from fear of battle. She was a trained killer. She had faced armies, walked through fire. But this was different. This was family. Eli stepped beside her. His shirt was torn again. His skin was pale, but his eyes were steady. We should go, he said softly. Caleth didn't speak. She felt trapped between two worlds. If she stayed here with Eli, they could run again. Maybe even escape off-world. Find a place where no one knew them. A place where she could finally be free. But if she left her sister to die, what kind of person would she be then? They're using her, Eli said. It's a trap. You know that. Yes, she whispered. I know. Then why are you still thinking about it? Caleth turned to him. Because she's the last one I have left. Eli looked down. He understood. But he also knew what this meant. Caleth had to make a choice, and either way, someone might not survive. They left the facility before sunrise. Caleth had memorized the map from the old military database. Her sister's signal came from an abandoned transport center, deep in the Rust Mountains. It used to be a hub for alien supplies before the war. Now it was just ash and echoes. As they walked, Eli noticed something strange. Caleth wasn't moving like before. Not sharp, not silent. She was slower, distracted. You okay? He asked. No, she said, but I'll keep moving. They crossed broken roads, climbed through tunnels, and avoided drone patrols. At one point, they had to hide under a fallen ship as two search units passed above them. Eli whispered, How many people did you kill before you met me? Caleth didn't answer at first. Too many, she said finally. But I remember every face. Even mine. Especially yours. He didn't smile. He just looked at her with quiet respect. Hours later, they'd reached the transport center. Everything was silent. No drones, no guards, just a wide open space and a single ship parked in the center. Caleth stepped forward, her gun ready. A voice echoed through the loudspeaker. Welcome back, Caleth. You always were the loyal type. Caleth's jaw tightened. It was Commander Volan. Where is she? She shouted. Where's my sister? Volan laughed. Oh, she's here. But you'll only see her if you walk inside. Alone. Eli grabbed her arm. Don't, he whispered. They'll kill you. Caleth looked at him. I don't care what happens to me, she said. I just want to see her. And what about me? Eli asked. What if I lose you? Caleth's heart twisted. She had never belonged anywhere. Until now. With him. But blood still called to her. Family still meant something. She pulled away from him gently. Stay here, she said. No, Eli said. I'm going with you. Please, she whispered. If this is the end, I want to protect at least one person I care about. He didn't fight her. He just nodded and watched her walk into the trap. Inside the transport building, lights flickered. Old metal walls echoed with every footstep. Caliph moved slow, gun raised. She could hear breathing, wires humming, soft whispers behind doors. Then, Caliph, the soft voice. She turned. Her sister stood in the center of the room, hands bound, eyes wide. She was real, not a hologram. Caliph ran forward, only to be thrown back by a blast of energy. A net dropped from above, covering her with sparks and metal wire. Commander Volan stepped out of the shadows. "Did you really think we'd let you walk free after what you did?" Caliph struggled, her armor sparking. "Let her go," she shouted. Volan grabbed her sister by the arm. "You want her? Then watch what your weakness has cost you." He raised his gun, and suddenly, a blaster shot rang out. Volan fell back, wounded. Eli burst into the room, holding the stolen weapon. "You left the back door open," he said. "Bad move." Chaos followed. Caliph broke free from the net. Her sister kicked a guard and ran. Eli fired again, protecting them both. Caliph grabbed her sister and shouted, "Run!" Together, they escaped through a side tunnel as alarms blared behind them. Outside, they collapsed behind a wrecked wall. Eli's hand was burned. Caliph's armor was cracked. Her sister was crying. But they were alive and free. For now. Caliph looked at Eli. "You came back," she said. "You thought I wouldn't. You should have run." "I did," he said, "but toward you." She reached out and touched his face gently. A moment passed. Then another. Then a kiss. Quick, soft, real. A promise in silence. But high above them, ships were already moving again. A new order had been sent. Bring Caliph back. No mercy. And this time, bring her dead. The last battle. Night fell over the Rust Mountains like a heavy curtain. Cold winds screamed through the rocks. Storm clouds gathered in the sky. Rain began to fall, soft at first, then harder, washing the dust from the broken world. Caliph stood on the edge of a high ridge. Her silver eyes looked down at the dark land below. Smoke rose in the distance. Alien ships hovered silently in the clouds, waiting. They were coming. This time, they weren't sending drones. They were sending everything. Behind her, Eli and her sister sat by a fire made of broken crates. They had found an old bunker half buried under a hill. It wasn't much, but it was all they had left. "They'll come at sunrise," Caliph said. Eli stood up. "We fight." Caliph nodded. "We fight." Her voice was calm, but her heart was not. This wasn't just a mission anymore. This was the end of something, and maybe the beginning of something else. Hours passed. Caliph sat alone near the fire. Her sister slept beside Eli, both too tired to speak. But Caliph stayed awake. She looked at her hands, scared, armored, shaking. For years, those hands had taken life. Now they had saved it. She wondered, was it enough to undo everything? A soft voice broke the silence. "You're not who you were," Eli said. Caliph didn't look at him. "No, I'm not." "Do you regret saving me?" She turned to face him. "No," she whispered. "You're the only thing I don't regret." He stepped closer. "You're still afraid." "Yes, but not of dying." She shook her head. "Then what?" Caliph stared into the fire. "Of losing what I finally found. Too late." Eli took her hand. "Then let's make sure it's not too late." Just before dawn, the sound of engines filled the sky. Ships descended like shadows with red eyes. Giant war machines landed on the ridges above. Dozens of alien soldiers in black armor marched through the valley. And at the center of them all, Commander Volan. His armor was gold. His face was calm. And in his hands, he carried a sword of light, a weapon of honor, used only in final battles. He looked around the ruins. "Caliph," he shouted, "come face the truth." Caliph stepped forward, gun in hand. Eli stood beside her, holding a rifle. Her sister stayed behind the wall, watching, heart pounding. Volan spoke again. You betrayed your blood. You chose the enemy. Now, you fall with him. Caliph raised her voice. You call him the enemy, but he gave me something none of you ever did. Mercy. Humanity. Volan raised his sword. Then you die as one of them. The battle began with a scream of engines and the fire of war. Caliph moved like a ghost, fast and silent. Her blaster fired with deadly aim. She rolled, ducked, dodged, each move perfect. Eli covered her back, taking down 2 soldiers with a stolen grenade. Her sister ran for shelter, trying to stay hidden. Explosions shook the hills. Rocks fell. Fire burned. But Caliph didn't stop. This was her fight, her final stand. Volan cut through rubble and marched toward her. Their eyes met across the field. He pointed his sword. Face me. Caliph dropped her rifle. She walked forward. I don't need a gun, she said. I only need to finish this. The two clashed, metal against light. Strike after strike, the battle echoed across the valley. Caliph moved with purpose, not as a soldier of war, but as a soul finally free. Volan shouted, You are nothing without us. She blocked his blade. Then I'd rather be nothing than be like you. With one final move, she disarmed him. He fell to his knees, but she didn't kill him. Instead, she stepped back. This is what mercy looks like. But Volan pulled out a hidden knife. Before he could strike, a gunshot. Eli had fired. Volan fell. Dead. Silence fell over the battlefield. The remaining soldiers dropped their weapons. They had seen the truth. They had seen the war end, not with blood, but with choice. Later, as the sun rose fully, Caliph stood beside Eli and her sister. The valley was quiet now. Peaceful. What happens next? Eli asked. Caliph looked to the sky. We rebuild, she said. Maybe not for everyone, but for us, yes. Eli smiled. Together. Always. She took his hand. Not as a warrior. Not as a weapon, but as someone human at heart. The choice between blood and love. The cold air of Xylon 9 cut through the mountain like a blade. Rain began to fall, soft and silent, dripping from rusted metal and broken stones. Caliph stood near the mouth of a cave, watching the sky, motionless. Inside the cave, Eli made a small fire with old wiring and dry leaves. Caliph's sister, Lyra, rested quietly, her thin body wrapped in an old blanket. She had barely spoken since they rescued her. Her eyes held fear, and behind that, shame. Caliph's mind spun like a broken machine. Her sister was alive. But the message, the trap, the near-death moment, none of it made sense. Caliph stepped back inside. Eli looked up. How is she? Not good, Caliph said. He nodded. Neither are you. She sat down across from him. The fire danced between them. She was their prisoner, Caliph said. For months, maybe more. They used her because they knew I would come. And you did, Eli said. Caliph looked down. I had to, even if it meant dying. Yes. Eli poked the fire gently. Sparks floated into the air. Do you know what they did to her? He asked. No, Caliph whispered, but I saw it in her eyes. They were quiet for a long time. Then Caliph's sister, Lyra, spoke. Her voice was thin, shaky. They made me say those words, she said. The message. I didn't send it. They recorded it. Caliph turned to her, shocked. What? They tortured me, Lyra said, her eyes filling with tears. They told me. If I said those words, they'd stop. They promised to let me live. So I said it. Caliph's heart shattered. All this time, she believed her sister was in danger because of her. But now, I'm sorry, Lyra cried. I didn't want to betray you. Caliph crawled to her side and held her tightly. You didn't betray me. They did. Eli stood up and walked outside to give them space. The rain was heavier now. He looked out over the cliffs. Alien ships still flew in the distance, watching, waiting. He knew what was coming. They weren't done. That night, Caliph found Eli sitting alone, back against a wall. She sat beside him. Their shoulders touched. You were right, she said. About what? It was a trap. He looked at her. But you still went, he said. Because some things are more important than survival. Eli nodded. Like love. Caliph hesitated. She had never said that word out loud. Not in this way. I don't know what love is, she said softly. But I know how it feels to be willing to die for someone. Eli turned his head toward her. Then maybe that's it. They looked at each other. The silence between them wasn't heavy anymore. It was peaceful. Like home. In the early hours of morning, Caliph received another message. But this time, it wasn't from the army. It was from a secret contact, an old friend from the academy, a soldier named Rava who had vanished during the war. The message was encrypted. Caliph played it alone. Rava's voice was shaky. Caliph, I know what they're planning. You need to leave Cylon 9. Now, they're not just after you. They've marked your bloodline, your sister, and anyone you protect. Eli, they want him too. They've labeled you both as influenced by human corruption. They're calling it a cleansing. Caliph froze. Rava continued. You have one chance. There's a rebel pilot hiding in the North Ridge. Name's Sarin. She owes me. Find her. She'll get you off-world. But hurry. Once the cleansing order starts, no one is safe. Not even children. The message ended. Caliph stared at the screen in silence. Her worst fear had come true. This wasn't about her anymore. They wanted to erase anyone touched by peace, by love, by hope. She called Eli and Lyra together. We need to leave, she said. Now. Why? Eli asked. Caliph's eyes burned with fire. Because they've started something worse than war. And if we stay, we die. She looked at Lyra. Can you walk? Lyra nodded slowly. Eli looked between them. Where do we go? Northridge, Caliph said. There's a pilot. Rebel. She can get us out. Eli grabbed his pack. Then what are we waiting for? They moved fast, through the rain and rubble, traveling through back paths only Caliph knew. They crossed fallen bridges, slid down muddy hills, and avoided patrols. At one point, Lyra nearly collapsed. Eli carried her on his back. Caliph watched him, this human with no reason to help, but every step he took reminded her. This is why she chose him. Not because of blood, not because of duty, but because of who he was when no one was watching. And in that moment, Caliph knew the truth. This wasn't a choice between blood and love. It was a fight to protect both. But as they neared the North Ridge, Caliph's scanner lit up red. They're here, she whispered. A squad of black-armored soldiers blocked the pass. Eli reached for his weapon. Caliph stepped in front of him. Not this time, she said. I'll talk to them. Caliph, trust me. She walked forward slowly, hands open. The squad raised their guns. Caliph of Xylon, surrender now. But she kept walking. I'm not your enemy, she said. But if you touch the people behind me, I'll become your worst mistake. They hesitated. Behind them, a ship landed. From the door stepped a woman in rebel gear. Tall, scar across one eye. Caliph, she shouted. You Rava's friend. Caliph nodded. You must be Sarin. Get in. Now, before they change their minds. They ran. Guns fired. Explosions hit the ground, but they made it inside. The ship lifted off. Eli pulled Caliph close. We made it. She didn't speak, but the tear in her eye said it all. They had escaped. For now. The last battle. The stars outside the ship's window looked cold and endless. Caliph sat near the back of the rebel ship, her body still, but her mind racing. Her sister Lyra slept quietly under a thick silver blanket. Eli sat beside her, watching Caliph without saying a word. They had made it off Cylon 9. But the war was not over. It had simply changed shape. Saren, the rebel pilot, flew the ship with quiet focus. Her scarred face showed no fear, only calm. She had seen war before. Too much of it. "We'll reach the safe zone in 2 hours, Saren said. "Is it really safe?" Caliph asked. Saren didn't look back. "No place is safe now. Not since the cleansing order." Caliph nodded slowly. She knew what that meant. Her people were no longer just hunting her. They were hunting anyone who showed mercy, anyone who refused to hate, anyone who chose peace. The ship shook slightly. Caliph's scanner beeped. Eli looked at her. "What is it?" "Tracking signal," she said. A pause. Then Saren's voice came again, sharp this time. "We've been followed." Behind them, in the blackness of space, a large warship came into view, sleek, deadly, armed with plasma turrets and cloaked drones. Caliph recognized the design. It was not just any ship. It was Volan's command vessel. But Volan was dead, which meant someone even worse had taken control. Saren tried to change course, but the warship was faster. They had only one choice. "We land on Carthus," Saren said. "It's an abandoned mining planet, full of ash and tunnels. We lose them in the ground, or die trying," Eli said. Caliph stood. "We fight if we must." Saren looked at her. "You're ready for that?" Caliph looked at Eli, then at her sleeping sister. "I have to be." They landed hard on Carthus. Gray ash blew across the barren land like snow. The sky was dark red, thick with smoke. Old mining towers stood like skeletons. The tunnels below went deep, too deep to map. Caliph helped Lyra down from the ship. Eli scanned the area. "They'll come fast," he said. Caliph nodded. "Then we end it here." They set up inside the largest tower, placing old mining crates as cover. Saren wired traps in the tunnels. Caliph checked her weapons. Eli loaded a blaster, his hands shaking just slightly. "You don't have to fight," Caliph told him. "I do," he said, "because I believe in you." Caliph touched his face gently. "You were the only one who looked at me and didn't see a killer." "You never were," Eli whispered. Explosions shook the ground. The enemy had arrived. Soldiers poured from the warship, black armor, red lights on their chests. Their faces were hidden, their hearts even more so. The final order had been given. Destroy Caliph. Destroy anyone who stands with her. The battle began in the tunnels. Mines exploded. Fire rained down. Caliph moved like lightning, fighting with both blaster and blade. Her armor sparked with every hit, but she didn't stop. She was not just fighting for herself now. She was fighting for every version of herself that had been broken, trained, erased. She was fighting to prove that a weapon could become a protector. Eli stayed close to Lyra, guarding her with a shield and pulse rifle. Once he had been helpless, but not anymore. He wasn't strong like Caliph. He didn't need to be. He had something else. Heart. And sometimes that was the greatest weapon. In the middle of the chaos, a new figure entered the battlefield. A tall alien in silver armor. Face uncovered. Her eyes were gold, bright and cruel. "General Xira," Caliph whispered. Xira had once trained her. She had been the coldest of all. And now, she was leading the purge. Xira raised her voice. "Caliph of Xylon. Traitor. Weapon gone soft. Come face your maker." Caliph stepped forward. "You trained me to destroy," she said, "but I taught myself to protect." They charged. Blades met. Sparks flew. The fight was brutal. Xira was fast, but Caliph was free. She fought with purpose, not orders. With love, not hate. In the final moment, Sira raised her blade for a killing blow. But Caliph dropped her own, stepped in, and caught Sira's arm. "You don't have to be this," she said. "None of us do." Sira froze. Something flickered in her eyes. Doubt. Hesitation. And that was enough. Caliph struck the handle of her blade against Sira's neck, knocking her out cold. The soldiers stopped, watching, waiting, and slowly, one by one, they dropped their weapons. The battle was over, not with death, but with choice. Hours later, Caliph sat in the ruins of the tower. Eli beside her, Lyra asleep again, Saren fixing the ship. "It's done," Eli said. Caliph shook her head. "No, it's just beginning." "So what now?" She looked at him. "We go to every system that still believes in war," she said, "and we show them what peace looks like." He smiled. "We?" She nodded. "Always." She held his hand. And for the first time in her life, she felt human. The new beginning. The sky over planet Carthus was clear for the first time in years. Dark smoke no longer filled the air. The fires had died out, and across the ash-covered plains, silence had returned. Not the silence of fear, but of peace. Caliph stood near the remains of the mining tower, looking out over the valley. Her armor was scratched, her blade cracked, but her eyes were calm, soft, full of something new. Hope. Behind her, a small camp had been built. Not a military base, but a shelter. The rebels had arrived days ago. Wounded soldiers, lost civilians, old enemies, all gathered in one place, helping one another, sharing food, sharing stories. Something impossible had begun. Healing. Eli walked up beside Caliph, carrying 2 cups of warm liquid. "It's not tea," he said, smiling, "but it's hot and doesn't taste like dirt." She took the cup and drank quietly. "Better than the rations I had in the army," she said. He looked at her. "You're not in the army anymore." Caliph nodded. "I know. So what are you now?" She thought for a moment, then said, "Someone who finally got to choose." Her sister, Lyra, was sitting in a medical tent, teaching a group of children how to draw on old scraps of paper, strange shapes and bright stars. Some had never seen color before. Caliph watched her and smiled. "She's healing," Eli said. "We all are," Caliph replied. They sat on a rock together, sharing the quiet. "Do you remember," Eli asked, "the first time you saw me?" Caliph chuckled softly. "Yes, I was going to kill you. But you didn't, because you looked at me like I was more than what they said I was. You were." Caliph turned to him. "And what do you see when you look at me now?" He held her gaze. A protector, a leader, a sister, and maybe something more. Caliph looked down, almost shy. "I never thought I would have a life like this." "Neither did I." "Do you regret it?" she asked. Eli shook his head. "No, you changed everything." "I didn't," she said quietly. "You did." A meeting was called in the main tent. Caliph stood before the small crowd. Rebels, refugees, even former soldiers from her own people. She looked at them all, each one changed by war, and now searching for something better. "You know who I was," she said. "You've seen what I've done. I won't hide it. I was built to kill, trained to hate." She paused. But one human, one unarmed, wounded man, looked at me without fear, and because of that, I hesitated. I listened, and in that pause, I was reborn. A deep silence filled the tent. "We can build something new," Caliph said. "Not as aliens or humans, not as soldiers or rebels, but as people. Together." No one clapped. Not yet. But slowly, one by one, heads nodded. Eyes lit up. They understood. Something real was beginning. Months passed. Caliph became a leader, not of war, but of rebuilding. Her name spread through space, not as a traitor, not as a killer, but as a symbol of change, of courage, of peace. On forgotten planets, soldiers laid down their weapons. On ruined colonies, humans and aliens planted seeds in the same soil. They called it the Caliph effect. But she didn't want fame. She wanted freedom for everyone. Eli built a small home at the edge of the Karthus Valley. Simple, quiet, strong. Caliph moved in. They grew strange vegetables in the dirt, fixed broken machines, and sometimes just sat together, watching the sky. No orders, no fear, just peace. One night, as the stars blinked above them, Caliph asked, "Do you think they'll ever understand?" "Who?" Eli asked. "Those who still fight." Eli looked up. "Maybe not all," he said, "but some will." "How?" "Because of stories. Because someone will tell them what happened here." Caliph smiled. "Then maybe one day, a soldier like I was, will hear it. And stop. And look at someone differently. And everything will change again," Eli said. She nodded. "Just like it did, the day you looked at me." And so it ended. Not with a war. Not with a hero on a throne. But with a warrior who laid down her blade and chose love instead. The new beginning. The sky over planet Karthus was clear for the first time in years. Dark smoke no longer filled the air. The fires had died out, and across the ash-covered plains, silence had returned, not the silence of fear, but of peace. Caliph stood near the remains of the mining tower, looking out over the valley. Her armor was scratched, her blade cracked, but her eyes were calm, soft, full of something new, hope. Behind her, a small camp had been built, not a military base, but a shelter. The rebels had arrived days ago. Wounded soldiers, lost civilians, old enemies, all gathered in one place, helping one another, sharing food, sharing stories. Something impossible had begun. Healing. Eli walked up beside Caliph, carrying 2 cups of warm liquid. "It's not tea," he said, smiling, "but it's hot and doesn't taste like dirt." She took the cup and drank quietly. "Better than the rations I had in the army," she said. He looked at her. "You're not in the army anymore." Caliph nodded. "I know. So what are you now?" She thought for a moment, then said, "Someone who finally got to choose." Her sister, Lyra, was sitting in a medical tent, teaching a group of children how to draw on old scraps of paper, strange shapes and bright stars. Some had never seen color before. Caliph watched her and smiled. "She's healing," Eli said. "We all are," Caliph replied. They sat on a rock together, sharing the quiet. "Do you remember," Eli asked, "the first time you saw me?" Caliph chuckled softly. "Yes. I was going to kill you. But you didn't. Because you looked at me like I was more than what they said I was. You were." Caliph turned to him. "And what do you see when you look at me now?" He held her gaze. "A protector, a leader, a sister, and maybe something more." Caliph looked down, almost shy. "I never thought I would have a life like this." "Neither did I." "Do you regret it?" she asked. Eli shook his head. "No, you changed everything." "I didn't," she said quietly. "You did." A meeting was called in the main tent. Caliph stood before the small crowd. Rebels, refugees, even former soldiers from her own people. She looked at them all, each one changed by war, and now searching for something better. "You know who I was," she said. "You've seen what I've done. I won't hide it. I was built to kill, trained to hate." She paused. But one human, one unarmed, wounded man, looked at me without fear. And because of that, I hesitated. I listened. And in that pause, I was reborn. A deep silence filled the tent. "We can build something new," Caliph said. "Not as aliens or humans, not as soldiers or rebels, but as people, together. No one clapped. Not yet. But slowly, one by one, heads nodded. Eyes lit up. They understood. Something real was beginning. Months passed. Caliph became a leader, not of war, but of rebuilding. Her name spread through space, not as a traitor, not as a killer, but as a symbol of change, of courage, of peace. On forgotten planets, soldiers laid down their weapons. On ruined colonies, humans and aliens planted seeds in the same soil. They called it the Caliph effect. But she didn't want fame. She wanted freedom for everyone. Eli built a small home at the edge of the Karthus Valley. Simple, quiet, strong. Caliph moved in. They grew strange vegetables in the dirt, fixed broken machines, and sometimes just sat together, watching the sky. No orders, no fear, just peace. One night, as the stars blinked above them, Caliph asked, "Do you think they'll ever understand?" "Who?" Eli asked. "Those who still fight." Eli looked up. "Maybe not all," he said, "but some will." "How?" "Because of stories. Because someone will tell them what happened here." Caliph smiled. "Then maybe one day, a soldier like I was will hear it, and stop, and look at someone differently. And everything will change again," Eli said. She nodded. "Just like it did, the day you looked at me." And so it ended. Not with a war, not with a hero on a throne, but with a warrior who laid down her blade and chose love instead.